Welcome to the Creepin' It Real Show, your one-stop shop for weird news, spooky, and otherworldly and paranormal shenanigans. We'll take a dive into what's going on in creepy pop culture. You can follow Creepin' It Real Show on Twitter at creepin_it. You can email us at creepinitrealshow@gmail.com. You can also go to our website, creepinitrealshow.com. Without further ado, welcome to this week's episode.
Hello and welcome to the Creepin' It Real Show. I am one of your hosts, Moni, and today on this lovely day of time change where we're all messed up, I want to also bring in one of my co-hosts. I'm going to go with Christy first this time. How are you?
I'm not prepared. Oh my gosh. No, I'm just kidding. Great. Can't complain. Crazy life. This time change thing is really fucked up. And I dreamt about zombies last night and I woke up and it was like it was scary and I was afraid to pee. And so then I couldn't go back to sleep and then I finally did. And yeah, so it was an interesting night. So I'm ready to talk about even more fucked up shit.
Yeah. Well, that's good, I guess. And Yardley, how are you hanging in today?
Everything's good. It feels like that spring is here in Atlanta. I don't know if spring is technically right now, but it definitely feels like it, and everybody is out and doing things like it's spring 2019. So, but everything's good. It's a beautiful day, and I'm kind of excited to get into this.
Nice. So today our topic is axe murders, and it started off with just axe murders in general, and then I realized how many unsolved axe murders there were, which I thought was an even more interesting angle, is that there's all of these that we're about to talk about are kind of left to interpretation. So that's kind of exciting, but I did want to talk a little bit about what we're watching first. It doesn't look like there's too much. Yardley, did you have anything that you're watching?
I started watching that Jenny and Georgia show that dropped on Netflix. I'm probably about 4 episodes in. It's okay. Outside of that, nothing really. That's it. Oh, and The Conjuring 2. I started watching that as well. So,
had you seen that one before, or?
No, because The Conjuring 2, I'm going to have to go back and watch the first one because apparently The Conjuring 2, this one's in London or something like that, like the UK or something.
Uh-huh.
And you know how they do certain flashbacks talking about I don't know their names off the top of my head.
The Warrens,
Yeah, the Warrens.
Mm-hmm.
But it always has flashbacks and stuff, or talks about stuff that referred back to the first movie. Mm-hmm. And then I realized that they had the first movie on there. So now I stopped watching the second one and I'm watching the first one, which I never saw. I know y'all might be surprised, but I never saw it.
Yeah.
I never saw it.
The first Conjuring's probably by far the best one. I thought it was good.
Yeah. Is it directed by the same person?
I think it's James Wan, like Insidious, like that whole canon of films is all James Wan. At least the first ones are.
Yeah. And the second one, so that one is the one that's in the UK. Now that you've reminded me, I know that story. It is a weird story. And the first Conjuring, to me, that story, because these are all based on true stories. The second one, there's a lot of open questions about that investigation.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if, kids are kids. They did admit to lying about some of it, and that's, of course happens when they're kids, but there's also the entity. It's just weird. It's a weird story. The movie wasn't bad. I have a lot of questions about the actual real story of that.
Yeah. And the Warrens were famous in part for embellishing or trying to get murderers off for interesting defenses. I've always been kind of skeptical. I'm glad that people exist that help people, help families and people who need it with paranormal things that maybe others aren't equipped to help with, but I'm not sure that the Warrens were always on the level is my take on them.
Uh-huh.
So, that sounds like a good road ahead of you though, if you haven't watched those. The first one's definitely enjoyable. I hardly remembered the second one. But I was going to check it out again too, so.
Oh, okay. I was like, if you can't remember.
My kids The first one scared my kids pretty badly. That whole clapping hide and seek thing messed with them. Yeah, it was that part of it really messed with them when they watched it. So
my girlfriend watched it for the first time the other day, and she was messaging. She was just like, "Who would ever play hide and clap? What kind of idiot?" And she was like freaking out.
Yeah,
grown woman.
Exactly.
So 70s. Good. Yeah, 70s. There you go.
We did all kinds of stupid shit in the 70s.
Because they didn't have the internet, where we look at stupid shit but don't do it as much.
Exactly.
So what have you been watching, Christy? How do you pronounce this? The Holzer Files?
Holzer Files. So I accidentally stumbled upon this last night. I have not turned on a TV all week. My life is completely fucking insane right now. So I got home late last night and just needed to turn my brain off. So I turned on the TV, and I guess my TV just knows me now. It just goes towards the channels that it thinks I'm going to like, because I don't even turn on the Travel Channel. I always have it on Discovery. Mm-hmm. And it was on the Travel Channel, and I've never watched the show, so it was just on and caught my attention. Has anybody ever heard of Hans Holzer from back to the 70s? I haven't.
I mean, I've seen the show, around, but I don't know that I've ever watched it. What was he again? Because like I said, I've seen the show around.
So this guy back in the 60s or the 70s or both, up until he died, was a big, called basically the America's first ghost hunter.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Has all these recordings of when he would go to these, and he visited almost every castle out there, all these haunted places, and did all these cases and recorded everything. And so
it's back before they could really fake as much as we can now too. Yeah. So he's got some really interesting evidence. He was kind of the pioneer, huh?
Yeah. I'm learning, because I was watching this and I was like, Holzer, Take It to Church. Isn't that his name? I don't know. The guy that sings Take Me to Church or whatever. Mm. Anyway, I don't know. But, I had no idea. And so I was watching it. And so these three people, reinvestigate his files. Some of them he never got to investigate, but he was dealt with people that, were involved in some of these cases, and so they're actually going back and dealing with cases that he didn't even get to do, or in some of them that he did, they're following up, all kinds of different stuff, and it's actually really good. It's kind of cheesy. I mean, it's paranormal, so it's kind of mm-hmm. The psychic is she's pretty, so that helps. She seems really good, actually. Okay. Really,
I thought you were just saying well, she's pretty, so I guess we can call
she's pretty, and she seems really in it. She's not one of those psychics that's something happened here and it was a long time ago, and she seems really into what, because he reviews the files and he doesn't tell her, and then he just takes her when he gets there, and she has to walk around, and there's been things that people said happened that she gets there and is that didn't happen. And then he investigates it and finds out that actually didn't happen. And so it's pretty interesting. So I would say check it out. It took me a while to figure out what the fuck was going on, because I didn't know what I was watching. I'm what is the Dead Files? It's similar to the Dead Files, where the psychic goes with the cop, and she, does an investigation with him at first, and then she says kind of what happened, and then he goes in and investigates what she says. So similar situation, but they're actually basing it on this guy's old files. So worth a shot. Nice. Check it out.
I'll check that out. I've seen it around, like I said, so now it sounds interesting. So the only thing that I've really watched that wasn't Law and Order SVU, which I don't know what's wrong with me, that SVU is my go-to for self-soothe, because it's pretty fucked up too. But the movie that I was talking about last week, Stay Out of the Fucking Attic, is out on Shudder right now. I didn't end up reviewing it for Soda and Telepaths, but it's available for everyone right now, and it's a movie. It exists. There's some coolish creatures. There's a lot of gore. It's an okay concept. It's a way to spend a little over an hour. It's not very long. So yeah, enjoy that movie. If you like fighting Nazis, that part's cool, I guess. It just really takes, they make a big deal about having diverse characters, and they make them like really one note, super gory for the sake of gory. I don't know. It's a movie. It's a creature feature. So,
All right.
Without further ado, after that glowing review of Stay Out of the Fucking Attic, we are going to talk about unsolved axe murders, and there will be some here that you've probably heard of, especially the first one. And there'll be some hopefully that you have not heard of. But either way, I've done a lot of research on a few of these, and it's pretty interesting. So our sources are Wikipedia, Road Trippers, Ranker, and KMOV Channel 4. It was a local news station for the last story. But I'm going to guzzle what is still my first cup of coffee while Yardley reads us about the Borden axe murders.
Okay. Lizzie Andrew Borden was born July 19th, 1860 in Fall River, Massachusetts to Sarah, Anthony, and Andrew Jackson Borden. 3 years after the death of Lizzie Borden's mother, Sarah, Andrew married Abby Dufresne Gray. Lizzie stated that she called her stepmother Miss Borden and demurred on whether they had a cordial relationship. She believed that Abby had married her father for his wealth. In May 1892, Andrew killed multiple pigeons in his barn with a hatchet, believing they were attacking local children to hunt them. Lizzie had recently built a roost of pigeons, and it has been commonly recounted that she was upset over the killing of them. Tension had been growing with the family in the months before the murders, especially over Andrew's gifts of real estate to various branches of Abby's family. For several days before the murder, the entire household had been violently ill. A family friend later speculated that mutton left on the stove to use in meals over several days was the cause, but Abby had feared poisoning, as Andrew had not been a popular man.
Okay. So, August 4th, 1892. Although the cleaning of the guest room was one of Lizzie's and Emma's regular chores, Abby went upstairs sometime between 9 a.m. and 10:30 a.m. to make the bed. According to the forensic investigation, Abby was facing her killer at the time of the attack. She was first struck on the side of the head with a hatchet, which cut her just above the ear, causing her to turn and fall face down on the floor, creating contusions on her nose and forehead. Her killer then struck her multiple times, delivering 17 more direct hits to the back of her head, killing her. When Andrew returned at around 10:30 a.m., his key failed to open the door, so he knocked for attention. The housekeeper, Maggie Sullivan, went to unlock the door, finding it jammed, and uttered an expletive. She would later testify that she heard Lizzie laughing immediately after this. She did not see Lizzie, but stated that the laughter was coming from the top of the stairs. This was considered significant, as Abby was already dead by this time, and her body would have been visible to anyone in the home's second floor. Lizzie stated that she removed Andrew's boots and helped him into his slippers before he lay down on the sofa for a nap, an anomaly contradicted by the crime scene photos, which show Andrew wearing boots. Sullivan testified that she was in her third-floor room resting from cleaning windows when just before 11:10 a.m. she heard Lizzie call from downstairs, "Maggie, come quick, Father's dead. Somebody came in and killed him." Andrew was slumped on a couch in the downstairs sitting room, struck 10 or 11 times with a hatchet-like weapon. One of his eyeballs had been split cleanly in two, suggesting that he had been asleep when attacked. His still bleeding wounds suggested a very recent attack. Dr. Bowen, the family's physician, arrived from his home across the street to determine that both victims had died. Yeah, no shit. Detectives estimated his death had occurred at approximately 11 a.m.
So this is the Lizzie Borden axe murders. You guys have probably heard about this, that whole Lizzie Borden took an axe and gave her father 40 whacks or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. They never did. There's a lot more back and forth with this whole trial and this whole thing, but I cut a lot out just because, like I said, you guys have probably heard it, but I hadn't known the speculation part that Yardley's going to talk about. It's kind of sad how everything turned out. So anyway, the trial and acquittal. 5 days before the trial's commencement on June 1st, another axe murder occurred in Fall River. This time, the victim was Bertha Manchester, who was found hacked to death in her kitchen. The similarities between the Manchester and Borden's murders were striking and noted by jurors. However, Jose Correa de Mayo, a Portuguese immigrant, was later convicted of the Manchester murder in 1894 and was determined not to have been in the vicinity of Fall River at the time of the Borden murders. So that rules him out. But again, I left that in because it's just interesting how many other axe murders there were at the time.
Yeah.
It turns out that's not a big mystery. I was reading up on it and listening to some podcasts, and they were talking about how you could have a crime of passion back in those days and it would be an axe murder because everyone had an axe and they usually kind of like didn't think about them and left them laying around. So it's kind of like grabbing a knife nowadays. It's like if you're pissed off at someone and there's an axe laying around, that's how that happens. So a prominent point of discussion in the trial was a hatchet head found in the basement, which was not convincingly demonstrated by the prosecution to be the murder weapon. Prosecutors argued that the killer had removed the handle because it would have been covered in blood. One officer testified that a hatchet handle was found near the hatchet head, but another officer contradicted this. Though no bloody clothing was found at the scene, Russell testified that on August 8, 1892, she had witnessed Borden burn a dress at the kitchen stove. So this is Lizzie burning a dress at the kitchen stove, saying it had been ruined when she brushed against wet paint. I'm not sure why you need to burn it if it's been ruined with paint.
Mm-hmm.
During the course of the trial, defense never attempted to challenge the statement. So this is also a situation where both the prosecution and the defense were bad at their jobs. Both victims' heads had been removed during autopsy, and the skulls were admitted as evidence during the trial and presented on June 5th. Upon seeing them in the courtroom, Lizzie Borden fainted. Evidence was excluded that Borden had sought to purchase prussic acid, purportedly for cleaning a sealskin cloak from a local druggist on the day before the murders. The judge ruled that the incident was too remote in time to have had any connection, so bad at his job. After an hour and a half of deliberation, the jury acquitted Borden of the murders. Upon exiting the courthouse, she told reporters she was the happiest woman in the world. The trial has been compared to the much later, obviously, trial of O.J. Simpson as far as the landmark in publicity and public interest and in the history of American legal proceedings.
Wow. I mean, I had something to say and now I don't know. Go ahead, Yardley. Sorry. Sorry, I'm out of it.
Let's talk about speculation. So, although acquitted at trial, Borden remains the prime suspect in her father and stepmother's murders. A prominent suggestion was that she was physically and sexually abused by her father, which drove her to kill him. There's little evidence to support this, but incest is not a topic that would have been discussed at that time. Mystery author Ed McBain suggested that Borden committed the murders after being caught in a lesbian tryst with Sullivan. McBain elaborated on his speculation in a 1999 interview, speculating that Abby had caught Lizzie and Sullivan together and reacted in horror and disgust, and that Lizzie had killed Abby with a candlestick. When Andrew returned, she had confessed to him, but killed him in a rage with a hatchet when he reached exactly as Abbott had. McBain further speculates that Sullivan disposed of the hatchet somewhere afterwards. In her later years, Borden was rumored to be a lesbian, but there was no such speculation about Sullivan, who found other employment after the murders and later married a man that she met while working as a maid in Butte, Montana. She died in Butte in 1948, where she allegedly gave a deathbed confession to her sister, stating that she had changed her testimony on the stand in order to protect Borden.
Well, and it just goes back to, everybody's always, as far as women go, if they stay single their whole life, which you'll see in a minute why she stayed single. She was a pariah in her community. Nobody wanted to be around her. But, she must be a lesbian, right? Because she's an old spinster. She must like women. There must be something wrong with her. There's always that kind of speculation when it comes to female murderers back in these days.
Yeah, this is what I was going to say. I think my opinion is I think that she did it. And I just think that at the time, there was still kind of misnomer that women couldn't be capable of violence, especially something like this. I just think
or if
that
they did, it had to have been driven by, the fact that she was a crazy
insanity.
lesbian or something.
Exactly. Exactly.
And in her case, her father was not a nice man, whether he physically abused them or not. As Yardley mentioned earlier, he was not a popular man in the community. He just he was an asshole. And his new wife was an asshole. But I honestly think that it's possible that Lizzie was also an asshole. I mean, apples falling from the tree. And he had threatened her inheritance by marrying this woman and giving a bunch of the land over to her family instead of to what Lizzie thought, should be in their family. And I think that it just built up, and I think that she snapped and killed her father. And I don't think it necessarily has anything to do with him being physically abusive. And I definitely don't think it has anything to do with a lesbian tryst.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. I think she was incredibly entitled and privileged, and I could be wrong, but it seems like some of the stuff that I had read about her in the past was that she had a kind of somewhat decent relationship with her dad before he married this new wife. Mm-hmm. And then things kind of went sour after that because she didn't like her, of course, because again, that's another woman in the house. Like you're saying, he starts giving away all his shit and she thinks that's hers. So yeah, there was a lot of toxic situations going on in the family. And yeah, I could totally see her just being like, I'm going to get rid of him now before he gives away all my money.
Mm-hmm. It's totally.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
Yeah.
So here we're going to talk about later life and death. Despite the acquittal, Borden was ostracized. I know the word, but I can't say it. Ostracized by Fall River Society. Now, why wouldn't she just leave? Like, if it was that bad? I guess that
there was so much money and privilege and entitlement there for her, the family land and all that she stayed. And I think that she was, like you said, entitled. I think she was like, well, this is my home, so this is where I am. I got away with this.
Her name was
and also back then, if she was to bounce, I mean, it would have been a lot harder though. Like, you know what I mean?
Where does a woman on her own go? Yeah. No ties to the community or anything.
True. Yeah. Her name was again brought to the public eye when she was accused of shoplifting in 1897 in Providence, Rhode Island. In 1905, shortly after an argument over a party that Lisbeth had given for actress Nance O'Neill, Emma moved out of the house. She never saw her sister again. Borden was ill in her last year following the removal of her gallbladder. She died of pneumonia on June 1st, 1927, in Fall River. Funeral details were not published and few attended. 9 days later, Emma died from chronic nephritis at the age of 76 in a nursing home in Newmarket, New Hampshire, having moved to this location in 1923, both for health reasons and to avoid renewed publicity following the publication of another book about the murders. The sisters, neither of whom had ever married, were buried side by side in the family plot in Oak Grove Cemetery. Wow.
Can you imagine that she was so insufferable? I bet you that whole throwing a party was like, what? It's my home. It's my, and drawing more attention. And her poor sister was like, I didn't kill my parents. I wasn't involved in any of this. And I'm trying to help out my sister, and ended up leaving on her own to start a whole new life and having to move around because of renewed publicity and what her sister had done to her father and stepmother. So, and then the fact that they never spoke again and ended up buried next to each other. Like, I just feel bad for this Emma because I don't think she asked for any of this from what I've read, really.
Totally. And then the parents who were murdered have their child who killed them probably buried next to them.
Yeah. But, no one came to her funeral, so it says a lot about her. So.
Yeah, it definitely does.
Anywho, the Villisca Axe murders, maybe you guys have heard of this one. There's a great episode of Lore about it, and it actually gives a little bit more context that we'll get into in a minute. But the Villisca Axe murders in the very early morning hours of June 11th, 1912, sometime between midnight and 5 a.m., 8 people were bludgeoned to death with an axe inside the home of the Moore family, including all 6 family members and 2 friends of one of the daughters. 6 of the victims were children. The night of June 10th, mere hours before the killings, the family had gone to church, which ended at 9:30 p.m., and arrived back at the house around 9:45 or 10. Cigarette butts in the attic led investigators to believe that the killer snuck into the attic while the family was out and hid there until they fell asleep. Like most people in Villisca at the time, the Moore family didn't lock the doors to their house when they went to church. The parents, Josiah and Sarah Moore, were the first victims. The killer only used the blade of the weapon on Josiah, who received the most brutal beating. The rest of the victims were murdered with the blunt side of the axe, which belonged to Josiah. So again, a crime of opportunity, the killer did find the axe in the house. The family friends who were staying in the guest room, little ones, Ina Mae Stillinger, and age 8, and Lena Gertrude Stillinger, age 12, were the last to be killed. So basically, the killer either was in the attic or entered the back door of the home, which was unlocked because you didn't lock your doors in the middle of nowhere in 1912, and with an axe that he had found around the property, and went upstairs and killed the parents first, came downstairs, killed the family little girls, and then came to the guest bedroom and killed 2 people that weren't even part of the family. So all victims except Lena appeared to have been asleep when they died, but Lena was the only one who had defensive wounds and was lying across the bed. So little baby was trying to defend herself, which is super sad. Yeah. The axe was left in the guest room next to a 4-pound piece of slab bacon. At some point, the killer had covered all of the mirrors in the house with blankets and clothes. It sounds like that was done after. So if you're thinking that he didn't want to see himself while he committed these atrocities, that's not true. He actually killed the family, then went back once everybody was dead and beat all of them further about the head, and then covered the mirrors and the windows, and then covered their heads with sheets. And then cooked himself.
Yeah, I mean, that was a thing back then, wasn't it? That you covered the mirrors when people died? That was... I don't know.
Sure. Yeah, I was trying to figure out, like, the windows make sense because he doesn't want anyone seeing in. But again, he did all that after, so it was just kind of an interesting. He cooked himself a plate of food, which was left untouched in the kitchen, and he also left a bowl of bloody water where he had tried to clean himself up. So the gruesome killings were discovered the next morning when Mary Peckham, the Moores' neighbor, noticed that the family hadn't started their morning chores around 7 a.m. She called Russ Moore, Josiah's brother, who let himself in with a copy of his house key. So this was the front door that apparently was locked. After discovering the bodies of the Stillingers, he called the local peace officer, who called investigators. There were plenty of suspects, but the murder was never solved. One suspect, Reverend George Kelly, was actually tried for the murders. Kelly was a traveling minister who was in town the night of the crime. He was at the service of the Moore family attended before their deaths, but inexplicably left town between 5 and 5:30 a.m. the next morning. He showed a suspicious interest in the murders, though, and after being in and out of trouble with the law for sending obscene material through the mail. Remember when you had to still send obscene material through the physical snail mail instead of just over the internet?
Exactly. Those were the days.
He did a stint in a mental hospital and then was arrested for the murders in 1917. He confessed, then recanted, then eventually was tried and acquitted. It seems that most people didn't believe that he was mentally or physically capable of the murders. And actually, if you listen to lore, they kind of frame who they think did it. This was another situation, though, where as soon as the police were called, people just walked in, like people from around town, and were just like trampling all over the murder scene. Evidence was destroyed. Things were strewn about. So again, they didn't have the forensics that we do now, but things like shoe prints or anything else that could have been found, all of it got just decimated, and it made it impossible to find out who did this. And then real quick too, though, when you listen to lore, there was a string of other axe murders in the area around the same time. And so that's their framing, is that obviously that person did it. And that person did end up going to prison for the other axe murders in the area. So what I'm saying is hopefully that means that some justice was done. At least the person got put away and stopped from doing this anymore. But specifically for this case, nobody was ever actually sent to prison. And then the house is on every ghost adventure, ghost show, paranormal show, because you can go visit it now. So Yardley's going to talk about the ghostly encounters at this place.
Naturally, a house with such a dark and mysterious past quickly attracted rumors of a haunting. The house was lived in for years after the murder, although families never stayed for long. Ghostly phenomena reported at the house include disembodied footsteps, things moving, voices, apparitions, shadows, and just bad vibes. It's been on basically every ghost hunting show, from Ghost Adventures to Scariest Places on Earth, and all of the essential spooky podcasts, including Lore and My Favorite Murder. In 2014, a man staying there in an overnight ghost hunt inexplicably stabbed himself, an event that made national news. Robert Stephen Larson, Jr., 37, of Rhinelander, Wisconsin, arrived with a group of friends for a recreational paranormal investigation, according to Montgomery County Sheriff Joe Sampson. From my understanding, he was alone in the northwest bedroom, and the rest of the party was outside, and he called for help on their mobile, two-way radios, Sampson told me. His companions found him stabbed in the chest, an apparently self-inflicted wound, and called 911. The incident happened around 12:45 a.m., which is said to be the approximate time that the 1912 murders of Hosea and Sarah Moore, along with their 4 children and 2 visiting girls, took place. Larson had recovered from his injuries, but will not comment any further out of respect for the family.
Wow. So I just thought that was an interesting tidbit. And again, that place is still available. You can go visit. It's $10 to tour during the daytime, and then you can actually do overnights. And it's almost like an Airbnb situation. You get a little tour, and then they leave you, and you're actually allowed to spend the night with a party of up to, I want to say, 6 people. So that's something. Christy and I want to do that. If y'all want to join us, Yardley, of course, you're invited, but we want to go to the middle of nowhere, Iowa, and stay in the Axe Murder house. And I'll tell you what, I actually watched the Ghost Adventures on this, and it was an early Ghost Adventures episode, and it actually
So they weren't douchebags yet?
They were still douchebags for sure, but this episode, maybe because I was watching alone and it was late at night, but usually that doesn't bother me, it creeped me out. They got some really interesting EVPs, even if they faked them, what they said, what the EVPs, what the voices were saying was creepy. So even if that was like a horror film, I was like, ooh, check it out if you get a chance. I want to say it's season 4 of that show, but yeah, the evidence that's been collected, and then of course this guy is stabbing himself inexplicably and that kind of thing. It seems like a pretty active place, or at least that's how they try to bill it to get you to pay to go see it. But either way.
Well, I'm down with going, hell yeah. Maybe I'll get lucky and stab myself. I'm just kidding.
Maybe bring someone you don't like and take it out on them instead.
White people.
White people should only white people want themselves.
I'm down.
So the rest of these are unsolved axe murders, and they're shorter. So Christy's going to take us with the next one.
Okay. This is the Axeman of New Orleans. This mysterious killer was never properly identified, but his grip on New Orleans remains one of the city's most infamous tales. Between 1918 and 1919, 12 people were brutally attacked by the Axeman, 7 of whom perished from their injuries. People were terrified of this brutal slayer, but nobody knew who he was. Then one day, an anonymous letter was delivered to the local newspaper, supposedly from the Axeman. In the letter, he claimed to be a demon from the hottest hell and warned the city that the following Tuesday night he was going to slay again. However, he wrote, he would spare anyone who was playing jazz music. Okay. The following Tuesday night was one of the loudest in New Orleans history, as jazz was playing in every home. Apparently it worked, as no one was harmed that night. Of course, there was no way to know if the letter was the Axeman, and the criminal was never caught. It's not hilarious, but I can just picture.
That's one way to get
New Orleans.
People going. Yeah.
I just
wanted everyone to dance. I just killed all the squares, man.
Can you imagine Yardley being in New Orleans and can you imagine all that jazz playing? That had to be crazy.
Making nuts.
I'd never heard of this. The Axeman. You ever heard about any of that, Christian? I've never heard anybody mention it. Yeah.
That's crazy. I'd love to hear.
You're gonna have to inquire.
Exactly. Find out what night he got them to play the jazz, Tuesday night, but what date. And then you guys can play jazz in his honor on that same night every year. That'd be fun.
That would be awesome.
So, the servant girl annihilator. In 1885, a horrific axe murderer terrorized Austin, Texas. 8 murders occurred, all in a similar fashion. The targets were all attacked in their beds with a swift blow to the head with an axe. They were then dragged outside where they were raped and mutilated. Ew, after they were killed. Gross. The slayer often left the axe behind, but despite that evidence, the police could not catch the person responsible. However, the law finally caught an extremely lucky break when the perpetrator apparently fell right into their laps. In Masontown, a man in a drunken rage attacked a young girl in a saloon. He grabbed the girl and started dragging her out of the saloon and into a nearby house where her screams attracted cops. When they arrived, the man attacked the cops with a knife. Man, he's going whole hog. And even though they tried to subdue him, nothing worked, so the cops eventually shot him. A cop's bullet lodged in the man's spine and paralyzed him, and he perished the following day. Okay. It was only then that the cops noticed that the man only had 9 toes, just like the servant girl annihilator, whose bloody footprints had been left at several crime scenes. Was he barefoot leaving footprints? Like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
Okay. He likes to bathe in the blood, apparently. Was this the mysterious slayer? Despite this clue, the identity of the servant girl annihilator has never been conclusively determined. I wonder if any other murders occurred, though.
I wonder if anybody made that their gamer tag, because that's the servant girl annihilator.
That's my new band name.
Annihilator always does up the ante. Yeah, for sure.
I know you're, I might have to look into that one. That's a nice name to be playing team deathmatch with. Okay, the Helen Jewett murderer. This story is a tragedy, as the police most likely had the culprit in their custody, but just couldn't convict him due to prejudice. In 1836, an escort named Helen Jewett was found axed to death in her bed. If it wasn't bad enough, her body was slowly starting to burn from a fire that had been started on her bed. The other escorts quickly pointed to Richard Robinson, a regular of Jewett's, who didn't flinch in the slightest when he was taken to her remains. The axe was traced to Robinson, as well as a cloak left behind, but even though the story got national attention, it wasn't enough for a conviction because the judge insisted on telling the jury not to take into account the testimonies from other prostitutes.
Wow.
That's so sad. Saying the women were unclean and couldn't be taken seriously.
Yeah, I could see where that was going.
Because of that, a vicious criminal probably went free. And it's so jacked up, like when people say stuff, because it's almost like the people who are going to see the prostitutes, they're clean. And, you know what I mean? It's just so raggedy.
Because they're men, so there's that.
It's a job. Yeah, whatever. That's just, at least they're getting paid.
Yeah.
Sorry.
It's probably more than we can say for most of these men's wives. So.
But it's a job whose service that people obviously want. You know what I mean? Like
they've conquered supply and demand for sure.
It's interesting.
Yeah, the oldest job in the world.
We'll see. Women aren't allowed to go to school, and if you don't get married, you're a freak, but you have to support yourself. What are you going to do? You know?
Exactly. Just have to be owned by a man all the time. Give me a break.
One way or the other. Anyway.
Oh, boy. Anywho, I digress. Now we're going to talk about slaughter in Saxtown. The Stelzried family immigrated to southern Illinois like many others from Germany. They settled on a small rural tract of land known as Saxtown, about 5 miles south of what is now Millstadt, which remains steeped in German heritage today. Saxtown in 1874 was a tiny, close-knit collection of families trying to survive by farming the land in the midst of an economic depression. I apologize. On March 17th in 1874, when Benjamin Schneider needed to borrow some potato seeds, he ventured to his neighbor's small log cabin home. Schneider noticed the Stelzried land was quiet. Nobody was bustling around doing the family chores. The horses and cattle had not been watered or fed. Schneider knocked on the front door. That's never good. There was no answer. He looked in the windows. Nothing. Schneider went back to the front door and walked inside. What he found was the aftermath of a crime so gruesome it would eventually captivate the entire nation. 65-year-old Carl Stelzride was laying in a large pool of blood, throat cut from ear to ear, his body nearly decapitated. In the next room was his 36-year-old son, Frederick, skull crushed and throat slashed. Next to him was his 28-year-old wife, Anna, and their children, 3-year-old Carl and 8-month-old Anna. All had been bludgeoned to death, believed to be by an axe. The bodies were all found cold. Damn, how do you, look, murdering an adult is bad, but how do you murder an 8-month-old? Like, what? Jesus.
What did it ever do to you? Jesus.
I don't know why this right now, because I don't know if anybody who watches TikTok watches those videos where, a woman's like watching a horror movie and she's freaking out, and then it shows her watching true crime and they're like, the woman was murdered, her throat was cut, her arms were cut, her head was cut off, and she's just like, like all engrossed in it, and I'm like, yep, that's pretty much.
But don't kill a dog or a baby, then we gotta freak out. So.
Exactly.
So what happened that horrific day in Saxtown? Police began looking backward. About 6 weeks before the Stelzride family was brutally murdered, a German farmer was shot and killed in broad daylight. Later, another farmer was nearly beaten to death in his wagon. Before the murders, Frederick Stelzride told some friends that he had just received a substantial inheritance from Germany. The Stelzride estate was reportedly worth several $1,000s at the time of the murder. Police now tied themselves to the theory that the murder of the family was intended to eliminate all heirs to the estate. Police discovered there was very little taken from the home, leading them to believe that the motive was personal. 2 separate rewards of $1,000 were offered to solve the crime, but that caused more problems. Private investigators soon flocked to Saxtown, hoping to claim the big money, giving police tips on nearly everyone. There was one survivor of the carnage in Saxtown, the family dog Monk. He was found lying on the floor, quietly keeping watch over the bodies. Monk was said to be vicious towards strangers, so police believed that the murderer was someone who was friends with the family. 9 suspects would eventually be arrested. All ended up being released.
Yeah, but if this was a crime financially motivated, why would it be a friend? Like, how would the friend benefit financially from, like, if it was a family member, okay, I could understand, but
maybe back then, since the family was in Germany, maybe there was either the inheritance came when the last family members in Germany passed away, so now there was nobody else there, or maybe the friend was counting on they don't send the money back to Germany, basically, and maybe it'll be like next of kin in the States. I don't know.
That's crazy.
Right, well, the family cabin stood until 1954 when it was torn down. But the barn that hosted the horses and cattle on that gruesome night still stands tall, with hatchet marks still visible in the wood. In 1986, Randy Eckert, who lives nearby, bought the land and built a small house on the cabin site. Eckert, who was raised in Millstadt, was always intrigued by the legend of Saxtown. I always wanted to buy that farm, Eckert said. In fact, I decided to live in the house for a couple of years. That didn't last long. Every year, around the anniversary of the killings, Eckert said he and his wife noticed strange things happening. One event has never left his mind. We were sleeping, and we had this small dog, and the dog woke us up. It was just shivering like crazy, he said. My wife got up and said, "Do you hear something?" And I said, "Yeah." Then all of a sudden, we heard a dog howling. It was from like 100 years ago.
Wow. Then it got stranger. Then we heard someone pounding on the door. The door to the house was glass windows, and it was a very small house. One step out of the bedroom, and you can see the door. And that door was bounding. Somebody was beating on that door, he said. I walked straight to the door, never seeing anybody out the window. And the closer I got, the sound disappeared. When I got to the door, there was nobody anywhere. That was enough for Eckert, who moved out and has since decided to rent the home out. I always tell renters the history of the house. You have to be in the right frame of mind to live there. For some reason, the renters don't stay long, you don't say. Eckert said he's probably had a dozen people move out. Many of them reported strange occurrences, always around the anniversary of the killings, even if they didn't know the date. But some love the history of the place. Wow. That's cool.
Yeah. Yeah. So he did it right, Christy. He bought himself a haunted house on purpose, and
See?
maybe he should start selling tours instead of rent. I don't know.
Well, that's what I mean. It would be a vacation place, not like just rent it out full time. I would love to do that. I guarantee well, look at us. We're like, let's go to Iowa. Like,
yeah.
Whoever would want to go to, sorry, I'm sure Iowa is wonderful, but
sure,
if I'm going to pay to travel somewhere, Iowa is not on my list unless I'm going to a haunted house. There you go.
Yep.
So yeah, Carrie Yardley has a beach house down in St. George, and it's the second oldest home on the island, and it is haunted. I didn't know until I saw something happen, and she
really?
Yes. She just happened to be staying at the other house down the street, and we met them down in Apalachicola to eat dinner, and I was like, so something happened at the house, and I've stayed in this house before over the years, and this is the first time something has ever happened. And I was like, I was asleep in the master bedroom. I woke up in the middle of the night, and there was a woman standing at the end of the bed, and I was like, nope, not today, Satan, and I closed my eyes, rolled over, and went back to sleep, because I tend to time to see things, and I don't think it's because I'm some great thing. I think it's just Scottish heritage. We're inherently kind of sensitive, and I don't ever do anything with it because it scares the shit out of me. And she was just standing there all calm as can be, and Dave was like, oh, you saw her. And I was like, who? And there were like so this lady was a freaking badass. She built that house. She was the second home on the island and built that house herself and lived there her entire life and actually died in the house. And most of the stuff in the house is hers. And she's like, yeah, that room that you're in used to be the dining room. But it's a bedroom now, so that's probably really confusing for her. So then a couple of days later, I was working at the dining room table, and the dining room is in the living room in that house. And there's a chair in the corner, and above that chair, there's like this crab, like plaque looking thing hanging up. And I see out of the corner of my eye that thing fly off the wall and land on the chair's footrest, like far. Like it didn't fall down and like bounce onto the footrest. It flew off the wall and landed right onto the footrest, which is, the chair's big, like it's long. And I was like, okay. So then I texted Carrie and I was like, told her what happened. She's like, yeah, she's pissed because her mask used to hang there. She used to collect masks, and a mask of hers that she had left in the house used to hang there, and somebody stole it. So Carrie like threw this cheapy ass crab thing up there. And yeah, so I'm telling you, I keep telling her, I'm like, you need to advertise this place as haunted. You get a lot of people renting it. She's like, no way. So yeah, I'm telling you that people will come. Because now I'm like, I want to stay at that house now. She's got 3 there, and I'm like, nope, I want to stay at that house, and it's the smallest one. But I'm like,
that's kind of funny because I've stayed in a couple, of the other. They never said nothing to us about it, but this was back when like Adam with like the crew, like when the kids had gotten married down there or whatever, and
right.
Yeah, maybe I was just too drunk, or none of that stuff. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like none of that stuff happened, but maybe the vibe was different and nothing happened. But now I'm curious as well.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I had stayed there several times before at that house, and nothing ever happened. She had never said a word to me about it until I saw that woman standing there, and like she was very much like she had to have been. She was like the second person to live on the island, built that house. And it's funny because there's like a little hallway and there's all these books, and they're all her books. And so when you go down and you look through the books, you cackle because there's a lot of like mysteries. And then there's like basically books written back in like the 50s and 60s of like how to be like a badass, woman, to modern women, like all this kind of like, so she was a very much like they call her, the people on the island that knew her say she was a witch, and like they're all, but I don't know about that. I didn't see anything witchy there. I just the books aren't.
The only thing I know is I'm going to have to cuss their ass out, because how the hell have we rolled all over the earth and I've never heard about this?
Right?
So
I didn't hear. She never told me. She never told me until something happened, and I was like, "Oh, now you're telling me?"
Yeah.
She's like, "Well, we don't really think about it because she's never seen much about it, but she hears about it." And so when I said I saw a woman standing at the end of my bed, she goes, "Oh, that's Miss Rowe or Kim, whatever her name, Kim Rowe, I think was her name." And Dave was like, "Oh, you saw her. I'm so jealous." And I was like, "What? What's happening?" So anyway, yeah. So I'm telling you, add that spin onto the rental, and I guarantee you people will be going in there.
Exactly.
So, anywho, but yeah, that's the story.
Cool. All right. And on that note, do we know what we're doing for our next show, or is it going to be a surprise, Mr. Yardley?
Well, it's going to be a surprise only because I haven't completely nailed it down. But if I do decide to have us, maybe talk about or review a movie or a documentary, as always, it's going to be something that'll be accessible to the listeners through, Hulu or Netflix or something like that. But whatever it is, I'll make sure that I post a heads up on our Facebook page, Creeping It Real show. What is it? Facebook.com/Creeping It Real show. I'll make sure that I give listeners a little bit of a head up on it. But yeah, we'll have something pretty cool.
Nice. Sounds like a good anticipation to have of what we're going to do next. In the meantime, Christy, do you want to give your socials?
Sure. You can find me on Instagram, Creepin' It Christy. You can find me on TikTok, Creepin' It Christy. And you can find us on Twitter, Creepin_It.
Cool. Yardley, where do we find you?
You can follow me on Twitter at militant_marker.
I am Moni Bear across the board, and also creatorsassemble.org. We just played, what did we play? Monster of the Week. I played Maffei Saunders, the monster hunter. And if that sounds like Buffy Summers, you are totally incorrect. So it's a lot of fun. Join us. Actually, it would really help us out, even if you don't want to watch, if you would follow Creators Assemble on Twitch, because apparently we get to be affiliates, and we're gearing up towards a really big 12-hour D&D charity marathon day in May. So if we are affiliates by then, it can make a lot of money to help our charity. So please just give us a follow if you're somebody who uses Twitch. It's at Creators Assemble. So without further ado, Yardley, did we got your socials, right? Sorry, it's 7 a.m. I'm exhausted.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, on that note, hope everybody else is keeping their shit together a little better than at least that Christy and I are. But maybe we'll see you at an axe murder house sometime in 2021. Let's get our vaccines and meet at the axe murder house. Until then, have a good rest of your day, week, month, year, whatever. Thank you for listening, and creep it real.